"Come on, big boy," I said. I took his wrist and attempted to pull him in the direction of the door leading down to the tunnel. At first he wouldn't go, and I might as well have been trying to pull a boulder out of the ground with my bare hands. "Come on, John, we gotta go, 'less you want the coach and four to turn back into a pumpkin," Harry said, giving his nervous laugh again. He took John's other arm and tugged, but John still wouldn't come. And then he said something in a low and dreaming voice. It wasn't me he was speaking to, it wasn't any of us, but I have still never forgotten it. They're still in there. Pieces of them, still in there. I hear them screaming. Harry's nervous chuckle ceased, leaving him with a smile that hung on his mouth like a crooked shutter hangs on an empty house. Brutal gave me a look that was almost terrified, and stepped away from John Coffey. For the second time in less than 5 minutes, I sensed the whole enterprise on the verge of collapse. This time I was the one who stepped in, when disaster threatened a third time. A little later on, it would be Harry. We all got our chance that night, believe me. I slid in between John and his view of the chair, standing on my tiptoes to make sure I was completely blocking his sight line. Then I snapped my fingers in front of his eyes, twice, sharply. "Come on," I said. "Walk. You said you didn't need to be chained, now prove it. Walk, big boy. Walk, John Coffey. Over there. That door." His eyes cleared. "Yes, boss." And praise God, he began to walk. "Look at the door, John Coffey, just at the door and nowhere else." "Yes, boss." John fixed his eyes obediently on the door. "Brutal," I said, and pointed. He hurried in advance, shaking out his keyring, finding the right one. John kept his gaze fixed on the door to the tunnel and I kept my gaze fixed on John, but from the corner of one eye I could see Harry throwing nervous glances at the chair, as if he had never seen it before in his life. There are pieces of them still in there, I hear them screaming. If that was true, then Edward Delacroix had to be screaming longest and loudest of all, and I was glad I couldn't hear what John Coffey did. Brutal opened the door. We went down the stairs with Coffey in the lead. At the bottom, he looked glumly down the tunnel, with its low brick ceiling. He was going to have a crick in his back by the time we got to the other end, unless I pulled the gurney over. The sheet upon which we'd laid Dell had been stripped, and probably incinerated, so the gurney's black leather pads were visible. "Get on," I told John. He looked at me doubtfully, and I nodded encouragement. "It'll be easier for you and no harder for us." "Okay, Boss Edgecombe." He sat down, then lay back, looking up at us with worried brown eyes. His feet, clad in cheap prison slippers, dangled almost all the way to the floor. Brutal got in between them and pushed John Coffey along the dank corridor as he had pushed so many others. The only difference was that the current rider was still breathing. About halfway along, under the highway, we would have been, and able to hear the muffled drone of passing cars, had there been any at that hour. John began to smile. "Say," he said, "this is fun." He wouldn't think so the next time he rode the gurney. That was the thought which crossed my mind. In fact, the next time he rode the gurney, he wouldn't think or feel anything. Or would he? "There are pieces of them still in there," he had said. He could hear them screaming. Walking behind the others and unseen by them, I shivered. "I hope you remembered Aladdin, Boss Edgecombe," Brutal said as we reached the far end of the tunnel. "Don't worry," I said. Aladdin looked no different from the other keys I carried in those days, and I had a bunch that must have weighed 4 pounds, but it was the master key of master keys, the one that opened everything. There was one Aladdin key for each of the 5 cell blocks in those days, each the property of the block super. Other guards could borrow it, but only the bull goose screw didn't have to sign it out.